The valley was designed to break you, but failed. They placed their bets on your destruction. Maybe they never said it out loud. Maybe there was never a meeting, never a formal plan, never a public declaration. But deep down, many people believed the same thing. They believed the betrayal would finish you. They believed the isolation would weaken you. They believed the weight of everything you carried would eventually become too much. According to human logic, they had every reason to believe it. Too much loss can break a person. Too much rejection can destroy confidence. Too much disappointment can convince someone to stop trying altogether. History is full of people who entered difficult seasons and never fully recovered. That's why so many observers quietly assumed your story would end the same way. But it didn't. Instead of collapsing, you became quiet. Instead of broadcasting your pain, you disappeared into the valley. And that's where the misunderstanding began. Because most people think the valley is a punishment. They think it's evidence that something has gone wrong. They assume that when life strips away comfort, certainty, relationships, and familiar routines, the only possible outcome is defeat. But the valley serves a different purpose. The valley reveals. It reveals what remains when distractions disappear. It reveals who stays when convenience leaves. It reveals what a person is truly made of when there is no audience, no applause, and no immediate reward for continuing. Listen carefully. Many chosen ones spend years wondering why their hardest season felt so concentrated, why everything seemed to unravel at once, why one challenge was followed by another, why the pressure felt almost impossible to explain to people who had never experienced it. The answer is simple. The valley was never designed to introduce you to weakness. It was designed to reveal strength you didn't know existed. And over the next few minutes, we're going to uncover why the season that should have broken you failed, why your recovery confuses people who expected permanent damage, and why the very place others assumed would become your grave ultimately became the place where you were forged into something far stronger than before. Number 1. The rejection of the valley. One of the greatest misunderstandings about your journey is that people assume you survived purely because you were strong enough. Strength was part of it, but that's not the entire story. The deeper truth is that the environment that was supposed to destroy you could never fully absorb who you were. Think about that. Some people enter toxic situations and gradually become a reflection of the toxicity around them. They adopt the bitterness. They adopt the anger. They adopt the dysfunction. Over time, the environment reshapes them until they barely recognize themselves. That was the outcome many people expected for you. They expected the betrayal to make you cynical. They expected the rejection to make you hateful. They expected the isolation to make you bitter. They expected the disappointment to convince you that trust was a mistake and kindness was weakness. But something unusual happened. The valley rejected that outcome. Listen carefully. The people watching your life may have understood your circumstances, but they didn't understand your nature. They looked at the pressure and assumed it would produce the same results it produces in everyone else. They assumed that enough pain automatically creates destruction. But pain doesn't reveal character. Pain reveals what's already there. The same fire that melts one material strengthens another. The same pressure that crushes one person refines another. The same valley that becomes a prison for one soul becomes a training ground for another. And that's exactly what happened in your life. There were moments when you felt exhausted. Moments when you questioned everything. Moments when getting through a single day felt like a victory. But even in those seasons, there was a part of you that refused to surrender completely. A part that kept believing. A part that kept observing. A part that kept moving forward even when progress was almost invisible. That's the part they never accounted for. Most people measure resilience by what they can see. They think resilience is confidence. They think resilience is motivation. They think resilience is someone looking strong while facing adversity. Real resilience is much quieter than that. Real resilience is getting up when nobody sees it. Real resilience is continuing when nobody is encouraging it. Real resilience is refusing to become the very thing that hurt you. And that's where the valley lost its power. Because the valley was designed to test your identity. Would you abandon yourself? Would you compromise your values? Would you allow pain to rewrite your character? Those were the real questions. Not whether you would suffer. Not whether you would struggle. Not whether you would feel discouraged. The real question was whether hardship could convince you to stop being yourself. And the answer turned out to be no. Now watch this. One of the reasons people become confused by your recovery is because they're measuring your survival using ordinary logic. From their perspective, the math doesn't add up. They know what happened. They know what you endured. They know the weight you were carrying. What they don't understand is how you're still standing. What they don't understand is how you still have hope. What they don't understand is how you managed to go through so much without becoming consumed by it. The answer is that the valley never succeeded in changing your core. It wounded you. It challenged you. It humbled you. But it never possessed you. That's a critical distinction. Because many people survive difficult seasons physically while losing themselves emotionally. They leave the valley carrying permanent bitterness. They leave carrying resentment. They leave carrying a version of their pain that continues controlling their future. You chose a different path. Not a perfect path. Not an easy path. But a different path. Instead of allowing the darkness to define you, you used it to understand yourself more deeply. Instead of becoming obsessed with what happened, you became curious about what it was teaching you. Instead of letting hardship shrink your spirit, you slowly transformed hardship into wisdom. And that's why the valley ultimately failed. It was designed to break your identity. Instead, it clarified it. It was designed to convince you that you were weaker than your circumstances. Instead, it revealed that your circumstances were never stronger than your spirit. And that's why you're here today. Not because the valley was easy, but because the valley could not digest what you were becoming. Number 2, the disruption of human logic. One of the reasons your recovery confuses people is because it violates the script they expected you to follow. Whether they admit it or not, most people have a mental timeline for how suffering is supposed to look. They expect trauma to leave visible scars. They expect betrayal to create permanent damage. They expect heartbreak to define someone's personality for years. And when someone experiences enough hardship, society often assumes that person will spend the rest of their life explaining, reliving, or performing that pain. That's why your journey makes certain people uncomfortable. You didn't perform your destruction. Listen carefully. This doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It doesn't mean you didn't cry. It doesn't mean there weren't nights when you questioned everything. The valley was real. The losses were real. The wounds were real. But what confuses people is that you refuse to build your identity around those wounds. Many individuals become attached to their suffering because suffering provides certainty. It becomes a story they can tell themselves. It becomes an explanation for every limitation, every fear, every setback. Eventually, the pain stops being something they experienced and becomes something they are. You chose a different path. Instead of asking, "How do I prove how much I've suffered?" you eventually started asking, "How do I keep moving forward despite it?" That question changed everything. Because healing rarely looks dramatic. Real healing is often invisible. It's choosing not to send the message. It's choosing not to revisit the memory. It's choosing not to reopen the wound every time life gives you an opportunity. It's the quiet decision, repeated thousands of times, to stop feeding what is trying to keep you trapped. And that's where people become confused. From the outside, they see progress. But they didn't witness the process. They didn't see the mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible. They didn't see the internal battles. They didn't see the moments when you had to choose growth over resentment. They only see the result. And because they only see the result, they assume it happened too quickly. That's why some people become suspicious of your healing. Not because you healed. Because you healed without their permission. You recovered faster than the role they assigned to you. You moved forward sooner than the narrative allowed. You stopped carrying the identity they expected you to keep carrying. And for certain people, that's deeply unsettling. Think about it. If someone has built their understanding of you around your struggle, What happens when the struggle no longer defines you? If someone expected you to remain broken, what happens when you become stronger? If someone secretly needed your pain to justify their own choices, what happens when your recovery exposes that assumption? Suddenly, your healing becomes disruptive. Not because you're doing anything wrong, because you're proving that recovery is possible. Now watch this. The world often knows how to respond to visible suffering. People know how to react when someone is crying. They know how to react when someone is falling apart. They know how to react when someone is obviously struggling. What they don't always know how to process is quiet resilience. The person who suffers deeply but continues building. The person who gets betrayed but refuses to become bitter. The person who loses everything and somehow starts over without making their entire identity about what happened. That kind of resilience challenges assumptions, because it forces people to confront a possibility many would rather avoid. The possibility that circumstances do not have the final word. The possibility that pain can become wisdom. The possibility that adversity can become transformation. And that's exactly what happened to you. The valley followed every rule that should have broken you. The betrayal was real. The isolation was real. The disappointment was real. According to ordinary logic, you should have stayed down longer. According to ordinary logic, you should have become harder, colder, and more defeated. According to ordinary logic, you should still be carrying the weight of what happened. But your story stopped following ordinary logic a long time ago. Because while everyone else was measuring the damage, you were quietly rebuilding. While everyone else was expecting collapse, you were creating stability. While everyone else was focused on what you lost, you were becoming someone stronger than the person who entered the valley. And that's why your recovery confuses them. They understand the pain. What they don't understand is the strength that emerged from it. Number 3, the scientist in the chaos. There was a turning point in the valley that most people never noticed. It wasn't the day your circumstances improved. It wasn't the day the pain disappeared. It wasn't even the day the people who hurt you finally revealed themselves. The real turning point happened internally. It happened the moment you stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That single shift changed the entire direction of your recovery. Before that moment, every betrayal felt personal. Every disappointment felt unfair. Every setback felt like evidence that life was working against you. You spent countless hours trying to understand why certain people behaved the way they did and why situations unfolded so differently than you expected. But eventually you realized something important. The question, "Why me?" never brought peace. It only created more frustration, more confusion, and more emotional loops that kept you trapped in the same place. So you began looking at the situation differently. Instead of focusing exclusively on the pain, you started paying attention to the patterns surrounding the pain. You became an observer. You began studying behavior. You started noticing how certain people always followed the same cycles. You noticed how some individuals only appeared when they needed something. You noticed how promises and actions often belonged to two completely different worlds. The more closely you observed, the more the chaos started revealing information. What once looked like random suffering suddenly contained lessons. What once looked like meaningless disappointment suddenly contained warnings. The valley was no longer just hurting you. It was teaching you. That's when your perspective matured. Before, you measured people by what they said. Now you measured them by consistency. Before, you assumed intentions based on words. Now you paid attention to patterns. Before, trust was often given automatically. Now trust was earned through repeated actions. These changes didn't make you cynical. They made you discerning. There is a huge difference between the two. Cynicism assumes everyone is dangerous. Discernment simply recognizes who has proven they are safe and who has not. The valley taught you that distinction, and once you learned it, you could never unlearn it. One of the reasons people are confused by your recovery is because they think healing means forgetting. They think moving forward means pretending nothing happened. They think strength means acting as if the wounds never existed. But that's not what happened in your case. You didn't overcome the valley by ignoring it. You overcame it by studying it. You extracted value from experiences that were supposed to destroy you. You turned betrayal into wisdom. You turned disappointment into discernment. You turned emotional pain into practical understanding. Instead of carrying only scars, you carried lessons. Without realizing it, you began approaching your life the way a scientist approaches an experiment. A scientist doesn't panic every time a result is unexpected. They observe. They gather information. They identify patterns. They learn from outcomes and make adjustments. That's exactly what you started doing. Instead of viewing every setback as proof that you were cursed, you started viewing setbacks as information. Instead of repeatedly asking why people disappointed you, you started identifying the traits that made disappointment predictable. Instead of reliving the pain, you began learning from it. That shift gave you an enormous advantage. Once pain becomes information, it loses much of its power to control you. The lesson becomes more valuable than the wound. The wisdom becomes more valuable than the disappointment. The understanding becomes more valuable than the suffering itself. And that's why your growth accelerated while others remained stuck. Many people experience pain and immediately try to escape it. As a result, they repeat the same cycles again and again because they never learned the lesson hidden inside the experience. You chose a different path. You examined the lesson. You identified the pattern. You extracted the wisdom. That's why the valley ultimately failed. It expected confusion to consume you, but curiosity replaced confusion. It expected pain to define you, but understanding transformed the pain. It expected you to remain trapped inside the emotions of what happened, but instead you became a student of what happened. The valley stopped being a prison and became a classroom. The betrayal became a lesson. The rejection became a lesson. The isolation became a lesson. And every lesson made you stronger than the version of yourself who first entered that season. That's the part people don't see when they look at your recovery. They think time healed you. Time helped, but awareness changed everything. The moment you stopped seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and started becoming a student of circumstances, the entire valley lost its power over you. And that's why you're not just someone who survived the chaos. You're someone who learned from it. And that's why it could never truly break you. Number 4, losing the need for rescue. There is a moment that arrives in nearly every chosen one's journey, and when it happens, nothing is ever the same again. It isn't dramatic. There are no fireworks, no grand announcement, no audience applauding your transformation. In fact, most people never even notice it happened. But internally, it changes everything. It's the moment you realize no one is coming to save you. At first, that realization feels devastating. Human beings naturally hope that someone will eventually understand. Someone will eventually show up. Someone will finally say the right words, provide the missing support, or help carry the weight you've been struggling to carry alone. For a long time, many people survive on that hope. They wait for closure. They wait for justice. They wait for an apology. They wait for the person who hurt them to suddenly become the person they needed all along. But the valley has a way of stripping away illusions. And one of the first illusions it removes is the belief that your future depends on someone else's arrival. That's the moment your power begins returning. Listen carefully. Many people think empowerment comes from gaining something. In reality, some of the greatest empowerment comes from letting go of expectations that were never serving you. The day you stopped waiting for certain people to change was the day you became free. The day you stopped expecting validation from people committed to misunderstanding you was the day your confidence became stronger. The day you stopped hoping someone else would rescue you was the day you started building the life you actually wanted. That's why the valley was so important. It forced you into a relationship with yourself. Without distractions, without constant reassurance, without someone else making decisions for you, you had no choice but to discover what you were truly capable of. And at first, that process was uncomfortable. Every challenge felt heavier because there was nobody to lean on. Every decision felt more significant because the responsibility belonged entirely to you. But responsibility has a hidden gift. It reveals strength. The more responsibility you accepted, the stronger you became. The more problems you solved, the more confidence you developed. The more obstacles you navigated, the less intimidating future obstacles appeared. Slowly, without even realizing it, you stopped seeing yourself as someone waiting for help and started seeing yourself as someone capable of creating solutions. That's a completely different mindset. The person waiting to be rescued feels powerless. The person building their own way forward begins generating power from within. And once that shift occurs, life can never control you in quite the same way again. Think about who you were before the valley. You probably trusted external stability more than internal stability. You probably believed security came from certain relationships, certain environments, or certain people remaining in your life. But the valley removed many of those things. It forced you to stand on your own foundation. And to your surprise, the foundation held. Not perfectly, not immediately, but it held. Every difficult season proved something to you. Every challenge you survived became evidence that you were more capable than you thought. Every obstacle you overcame weakened the belief that you needed someone else to save you. Eventually, a quiet confidence began emerging. Not arrogance, not superiority, self-reliance. The kind of confidence that comes from surviving things you once believed would destroy you. The kind of confidence that comes from rebuilding after loss. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing you've already faced some of the hardest chapters of your life and found a way through them. That's why the valley ultimately failed. It was supposed to leave you dependent. Instead, it taught you independence. It was supposed to leave you waiting. Instead, it taught you action. It was supposed to convince you that you were powerless. Instead, it revealed how much power had been inside you all along. And once a chosen one discovers that truth, something remarkable happens. They stop searching for a rescuer, because they finally recognize the person who carried them through the valley was themselves. Number 5, the fireproof legacy. The greatest misunderstanding about the valley is that people think its purpose was to destroy you. Looking back now, you can see that wasn't the purpose at all. The purpose was to reveal what could not be destroyed. That's an important distinction. Because when you first entered that season, there were parts of your life you thought you couldn't live without. Certain relationships felt essential. Certain expectations felt permanent. Certain dreams seemed tied to outcomes you could not control. Then the valley arrived and began stripping things away. One by one, assumptions collapsed. Comfort disappeared. Familiarity vanished. The life you thought you were building suddenly looked very different from the life unfolding in front of you. At the time, it felt like loss. Today, you can recognize it as revelation. The valley exposed what was temporary, so you could discover what was permanent. It exposed who was conditional, so you could appreciate what was genuine. Most importantly, it exposed how much strength you actually possessed beneath the identities, roles, and expectations you had accumulated over the years. That's why you can never be broken the same way twice. It's not because future challenges won't come. They will. It's not because life will suddenly become easy. It won't. It's because you now possess evidence. Evidence that you can survive uncertainty. Evidence that you can survive betrayal. Evidence that you can survive disappointment. Evidence that you can survive seasons where nothing makes sense. And once a person has that kind of evidence, fear loses much of its authority. The version of you that entered the valley relied on hope. The version of you leaving the valley has experience. The version of you that entered the fire wondered whether you would survive. The version of you leaving the fire knows you can. That's the legacy. Not the pain. Not the betrayal. Not the struggle. The transformation. Years from now, people may never fully understand what you endured. They may only see the confidence. They may only see the wisdom. They may only see the stability you've built. What they won't see are the countless invisible battles that created those qualities. But you will know. You'll remember the nights nobody saw. You'll remember the moments you almost gave up. You'll remember the seasons that tested everything you believed about yourself. and you'll remember that you survived them. So if this message found you at the right time, let it be a reminder. The valley failed. The pressure failed. The circumstances failed. Not because they weren't difficult enough, but because they underestimated what was inside you. If this message resonated with your journey, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone currently walking through their own valley, and comment fireproof below. Because the truth is simple. They thought the valley would become your ending. Instead, it became the place where your strongest self was born.